And then lastly, to our book that our epistle of Jude that we've been studying. We're in that verse 11. It says, "Woe unto them, for they have gone the way of Cain." We looked at that last week. "Ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward." Now it seems to me that there are nuances, but they're all coming back to the same place. And that is that this individual was motivated by essentially profit for hire. Now, if you don't think that you can apply this to this day and age, you're a lunatic. So I'm a little bit predictable. Just a little bit. I won't tell you where we're going right now, but you'll guess real quick. Do not turn to Jude, but it is the 8th message out of the book of Jude. That'll become clear later. I told you one of the reasons why I'm enjoying this is it's giving me the license to highlight what I call current problems in the church. We know from the Greek of the New Testament the word heresy originally carried with it party or sect. It did not necessarily initially carry with it the pejorative meaning that heresy or heretical carries with it in this day and age. But the use, as we know it now, actually started really strongly with the Apostle Paul, where he highlights both in 1 Corinthians and in Galatians regarding those who make divisions essentially on purpose with the intent to create schisms. But the early church was not just plagued with doctrinal deviation or disagreement, but something viewed as genuinely dangerous to the church. The view of heresy or heretics is hard in our generation, really, because, quite frankly, the church, Christendom at large, has really actually become quite heretical, that it's hard for people in our day and age to understand what the first church had to combat against, especially those who were eyewitnesses to Jesus or those in the, we'll call it the second row or the second backup bench after those eyewitnesses to eyewitnesses. And we know that in many places we read of those people who denied the resurrection. We know of many different doctrines that crept in if you study the New Testament. But one of the things that I think we can all agree on, if you study church history, and I, in fact, said this to you last week on Festival, for those people who are shopping for a church for its auxiliary functions, its entertainment, or they like that the preacher smiles and bats their eyelashes all the time, or whatever it is that you like, it's the wrong reason. You should be coming to church to learn about this book and how you may, A, know about God, the one you claim you wish to spend eternity with, and if that's true, then you make life down here boot camp for eternity. That means getting to know Him through this book. With that being said, you've got to almost look at church history to see that until the year 313, which was the Edict of Milan, or it's called 3 other names, but I always refer to it as the Edict of Milan, sometimes called tolerance. We have Christians basically from the time of Christ's death and resurrection until the edict in 313. We have Christians essentially dying for what they believed, and very terrible deaths at that. And it's only after that time that we begin to see councils that are beginning to take place, historically chronicled for us, where doctrinal matters are being settled. The Council of Nicaea in 325 is one of those, right until the Council of Chalcedon. In that particular council, essentially, doctrine basically becomes fixed. And after that time, anything after that time where there's a question, where people are debating, is this colloquial, is this good Bible or not, they'll refer back to that council to find out if that was ruled approved or disapproved, and everything is weighed essentially by that council. So when people in this day and age talk about heresy and heretical teachings, it's difficult for us to understand what the first church, the early church, was really fighting for. We live in an age of extreme syncretistic beliefs. That is, everything must blend and mesh. Now, I'm not one of these people that says, stay away from those people because. I'm not like that. I don't believe that at all. But we've also become, there are such blurred lines in, because people are not really learning this book, it's kind of very blurry. In fact, one of my friends who's trying to learn about the Bible, but is just kind of on the cusp of Catholicism and maybe being delivered out of Catholicism, like many of us have started there and drifted away and into the book, was talking to me about a conversation they had regarding somebody saying, well, God is love. And I said, stop. Yes, God is love, but love cannot be the thing that makes God God, because if God is just love, then you have a really impotent God. God has to be all-powerful. For God to be God, he can't just be God of love. And he is a God of love. It says, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. But that's not what makes God God. God has to have all power, including the power to speak, and everything becomes out of nothing, everything. Start there and work your way down. But this began a great discussion about people saying, well, we need more love and we need to get rid of the hate. Well, the problem is that hate will always exist because that's part of the flesh. Hello? Is anybody listening, right? So I could stand here and talk about that all day long. We've got to get rid of the hate. Well, the hate, again, is rooted in the flesh. And if we were going back even to this nation when it was more, it had a greater bent towards Christianity, there was still hate here. We still had hatred. It's not as though hatred was an eradicated force in this land ever. It wasn't. Why? Because as long as the flesh exists, and the flesh without the Spirit of God, you're going to have what Paul chronicles in Galatians 5. Those works of the flesh. Included there is hate or hatred. So the first church is dealing with some pretty important issues. I told you that I believe the issue that Jude was dealing with foremost was undoubtedly these that came in, these men that it says they crept in, and I've called them creeps, they crept into the church. Most likely, there was probably, as I've said, several streams going on. One of them undoubtedly had to be Gnosticism, which is maybe, yes, the Bible is true, but we have special and secret revelations of things that are not divulged, and you must come to us to receive them. And here's how Satan has managed to pervert this into today's universe. Just think about this. This is a group of people. We know agnosticism, A putting the front in the front of the word puts it in reverse. So to not know, the Gnostics claim to know and have special knowledge. And just think briefly that these people came out of a pagan stream. Now think and look at the church that holds the doctrine of you must come to us because we are the only ones who can tell you exactly. And you really do actually have a form of Gnosticism in the modern day church. Now I've said to you, be a Berean, you study. I give you the information, you go look it up. I'm not looking to be someone who says it's only me. I'm the one with the information and you just have to be, following me around. I might reveal it to you one of these days. No, I mean, unless you're talking about the dangles that we do here periodically, of which I learned from the master dangler, by the way, who, by the way, would introduce things and then he would never come back to them. That's what I learned. Now, this is what happened. Oh, time's out. Okay, come back next week, and then next week it's something else. But Gnosticism was rampant in the early church. So when I call Jude the book of apostates, really, you've got several things going on. And the examples that Jude has been helping us out with, the children of Israel, the angels, and Sodom and Gomorrah, And then again, we looked last week at Cain. And there'll be two more examples. What is interesting about this next example that comes out of Jude's text, and I told you not to turn there because I'm going to have you turn somewhere else. But in verse 11, Jude says, "Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain and ran greedily after the heir of Balaam for reward." And this is what's interesting. Just put somewhere, in fact, I'll write it for you here. This might make more sense to you. Let's do this. In Jude, and this is verse 11, we have here the error. That's an R. Of Balaam. Revelation 2 and verse 14. You have the doctrine of Balaam. 2 Peter 2, and that would be verse 15. And this one says, "Following the way of Balaam, who loved the wages of unrighteousness." So the way of Balaam. Now, these aren't the only references, but I find it quite significant. 3 different writers, and I've discussed this and told you regarding Jude and Peter that there is a close correlation, so no one really knows exactly. Some say one borrowed from the other or the other from the other. It doesn't matter to me. These are 3 different writers. Revelation, we know, was penned by John. The same John writing John's Gospel wrote John, the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation. So you've got Jude, John, and Peter talking about the error of Balaam, the doctrine of Balaam, and the way of Balaam. And I thought that's quite fascinating. 3 texts pointing out what we'll call nuances, but all of the same event. So I do want us to look at the event. I said it was quite predictable. I do want us to look at the event which occurs in Numbers, if you'll turn there. And something that I want us to kind of, again, more questions. I want us to kind of start with a few questions and go from there. And I've decided I couldn't figure out, do I want to read from the NIV? Do I want to read from the King James? Too many versions, so little time. Never mind. Some of you are still asleep. Just saying. Okay. What do I want to highlight here? A lot of reading. So if you're in Numbers, we're starting at Numbers 22. And I think actually, because most of you are reading from the King James, I'm actually going to read from the NIV. Feel a little ornery this morning. Then the Israelites traveled to the plains of Moab and camped along the Jordan across from Jericho. Now Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was terrified because there were so many people. Indeed, Moab was filled with dread because of the Israelites. And if you want to know that event, you've got to read the chapters before. My concern is what is regarding Balaam and Balak. Balak is the king of these people who will send for Balaam. The Moabites said to the elders of Midian, "This horde is going to lick up everything around us as an ox licks up the grass of the field." So Balak, the son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to summon Balaam, son of Beor, who was at Pethor, near the river, in his native land. Now, you've got to stop right here for a second. There's an incredible amount of questions around this individual. I don't suppose that I will answer them because there's so much debate. Most people are inclined to believe, A, that Balaam was not, obviously he's not part of the children of Israel, that he was from the land where Abraham came out of. And most scholars say that he even, I'll go on to explain, but even though he was used by God, that he was pagan that he was someone outside of the camp. God, by the way, I love this because if that is true, then that shows the sovereignty of God to call on and choose and use whomever he wants to. It's his business. There are some really great biblical messages out of this particular chapter, beginning with the fact that a heathen king, enemy with the children of God, summons a man who we will at this point label heathen, and what he says and what he does within the confines of the dialogue that's recorded really makes him at this point look more like a man of God than anything else, because he will dialogue with God and it sounds all great. So let me go and read what's said here. He sends messengers to Balaam. Balak says, "The people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the land and have settled next to me. Now come put a curse on these people because they are too powerful for me. Perhaps then I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the country. For I know that those you bless are blessed and those you curse are cursed." So somewhere we do not have recorded, Balaam was a known, and I'm going to say this, he's more labeled as a soothsayer than he is a blesser, a potential to curse and bless. He's labeled somewhere as a soothsayer. The elders of Moab and Midian left, taking with them a fee for divination. When they came to Balaam, they told him what Balak had said. "Spend the night here," Balaam said to them, "and I will bring you back an answer the Lord gives me." So obviously when I say, that's why I said I had to explain, when I say heathen, we don't have a record of him being included, but possibly back there. And I'm using this as just an idea, possibly in the train of Abraham's departure out of Ur of Chaldees, and by that time and by this generation, the name of Yahweh, the name of the Lord, had grafted and taken root in the hearts of some. This individual, as I said, is not part of the children of Israel, but certainly he says, "You wait here, and I'm going to go ask and inquire of the Lord." So the Moabite princes stayed with him. God came to Balaam and asked, "Who are these men with you?" Balaam said to God, "Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. A people has come out of Egypt that covers the face of the land. Now come put a curse on them for me. Perhaps then I will be able to fight them and drive them away." Now imagine this. Balaam is telling God these are the people that God delivered, right? But God said to Balaam, "Do not go with them. You must not put a curse on those people because they are blessed." The next morning, Balaam got up and said to Balak's princes, "Go back to your own country, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." So the Moabite princes returned to Balak and said, "Balaam refused to come with us." Then Balak sent other princes, more numerous and more distinguished than the first. They came to Balaam and said, "This is what Balak, son of Zippor, says. Do not let anything keep you from coming to me, because I will reward you handsomely. And do whatever you say. Come put a curse on these people for me." Balaam answered them and said, "Even if Balak gave me his palace filled with silver and gold, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord my God. Now stay here tonight, as the others did, and I will find out what else the Lord will tell me." Thus far, Balaam sounds like a pretty good guy, right? I won't do anything. I'm going to wait. I'm going to inquire. I'm going to ask. Sounds like a good guy, right? Hey, sounds like a great guy to me. That night, so why are these New Testament people calling it error, doctrine, and way, right? That night, God came to Balaam and said, "Since these men have come to summon you, go with them." God's now saying go. First he said don't go. Now he says go. "But only do what I tell you." Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and I'm reading NIV, went with the princes of Moab. But God was very angry when he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the road to oppose him. Balaam was riding on his donkey, that's the NIV, I told you that, and his two servants were with him. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand, she turned off the road into the field. Balaam beat her to get her back onto the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between two vineyards with walls on both sides. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pressed close to the wall, crushing Balaam's foot against it, so he beat her again. Then the angel of the Lord moved on ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no room to turn, either to the left or the right. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam, and he was very angry and beat her with his staff. Then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times?" Balaam answered the donkey, "You have made a fool out of me. For if I had a sword in my hand right now, I would kill you." The donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your own donkey, which you've always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" And he said, "No." Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his sword drawn. So he bowed low and fell face down. The angel of the Lord asked him, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times?" So I told you to follow along in the King James. "I have come here to oppose you because your path is a reckless one before me. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If she had not turned away, I would have certainly killed you by now, but I would have spared her." Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, "I have sinned. I did not realize you were standing in the road to oppose me. Now if you are displeased, I will go back." The angel of the Lord said to Balaam, "Go with the men, but speak only what I tell you." So Balaam went with the princes of Balak. Now, let me just stop for a second. Don't you think it's interesting? This man could not see, but his ass could. And just to put a little perspective, the ass is a female. When Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him at the Moabite town on the Arnon border, at the edge of his territory. Balak said to Balaam, "Did I not send you an urgent summons? Why did you not come to me? Am I really not able to reward you?" "Well, I have come to you now," Balaam replied, "but can I say just anything? I must speak only what God puts in my mouth." Thus far, he still sounds like a good guy, even though he was confused about his ass. Right? You know, people can get confused over anything. You got to put it behind you, though. Then Balaam went with Balak to Kiriath-Huzoth. Balak sacrificed cattle, sheep, and gave some to Balaam and the princes who were with him. The next morning, Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal, and from there he saw part of the people. Now here's Balaam's first oracle, and this is pretty important. Balaam said, "Build me 7 altars here, prepare 7 bulls, 7 rams for me." Balak did as Balaam said, and the 2 of them offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Then Balaam said to Balak, "Stay here beside your offering while I go aside. Perhaps the Lord will come to meet me. Whatever he reveals to me, I will tell you." Then he went off to a barren height. God met with him, and Balaam said, "I have prepared 7 altars, and on each altar I have offered a bull and a ram." The Lord put a message in Balaam's mouth and said, "Go back to Balak and give him this message." So he went back to him, found him standing beside his offering with all the princes of Moab, and Balaam uttered his oracle. "Balak brought me from Aram, the king of Moab, from the eastern mountains. Come," he said, "curse Jacob for me. Come, denounce Israel." "How can I curse those whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce those whom the Lord has not denounced? From the rocky peaks I see them, from the heights I view them. I see people who live apart, who do not consider themselves as one of the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob or number the 4th part of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and may my end be like theirs." Balak said to Balaam, "What have you done to me? I have brought you to curse mine enemies, but you have done nothing but bless them." He answered, Must I not speak what the Lord puts in my mouth? This is what I told you. Whatever the Lord tells me, this is what I'm going to tell you. His second oracle. Balak said to him, "Come with me to another place where you can see them. You will not only see a part there, but all of them. And from there, curse them from me." So he took him to the field of Zophim, the top of Pisgah, which we know just a little bit later in the history of the people will be the place where Moses goes up to look and survey the land. So from that very same lofty heights, Balaam will speak a second oracle. He said, built there 7 altars, offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Balaam said to Balak, "Stay here beside your offering while I meet him over there." The Lord met with Balaam, put a message in his mouth, and said, "Go back to Balak and give him this message." So he went back, found him standing beside his offering with the princes of Moab. And Balak asked him, "What did the Lord say?" I would have said, "You don't want to know." Then he uttered his oracle. "Arise, Balak, and listen. Hear me, son of Zippor. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should change his mind. Does he not speak and then not act? Does he promise and not fulfill? I have received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot change it. No misfortune is seen in Jacob, no misery observed in Israel. The Lord their God is with them. The shout of the king is among them. God brought them out of Egypt. They have the strength of a wild ox. There is no sorcery against Jacob, no divination against Israel. And now it will be said of Jacob and of Israel, see what God has done. The people rise like a lioness. They rouse themselves like a lion that does not rest till he devours his prey and drinks the blood of his victims. Then Balak said to Balaam, neither curse them at all, nor bless them at all. Don't do one or the other then. Balaam answered, did I not tell you I must do whatever the Lord says? Here's his third oracle. Balak again said to Balaam, come, let me take you to another place. 3 times a charm. Perhaps it will please God to let you curse them for me there, from there. Let's try a different angle. Does that look better? Does it look better from this side? Do they look better from that side? Now, you got to keep in mind something. While all this is going on, you and I know, because we read the book, that these people that are the children of Israel that God is protecting and not doing anything against are a bunch of rats in the wilderness, disobeying him. And yet God says nothing except through the mouth of the prophet what is essentially the appearance of, these are my children and they're good. No one better touch them. No one better say a thing. It's kind of interesting, the behind the scenes. If you're just taking this and just looking at it in parts, it doesn't really make sense. But if you look at it as we know what's behind all of this, you might say, maybe God could have just said, let's wipe them out. This is a good time. They've really gotten on my nerves. Let's just get rid of them now, right? No, not yet. Wait, there's more. Then Balak said to Balaam, come, let me take you to another place. Perhaps it will please God to let you curse them there for me from there. And Balak took Balaam to the top of Peor, overlooking the wasteland. Balaam said, build me 7 altars here, prepare 7 bulls, 7 rams for me. Balak did as Balaam had said, and offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Now, if nothing else, you got to give credit to Balaam for one thing, because God had probably said, build 7 altars and do this. Well, at least he got some heathen king to give an offering. Never mind. So he thought he was going to get something out of it, of course. Wrong reason for giving. Now, when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not resort to sorcery as at the other times, but turned his face toward the desert. When Balaam looked out and saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, the Spirit of God came upon him, and he uttered his oracle. And this one is quite the one. We know that a lot of things that Balaam utters are prophetic. They are doctrinally sound in terms of salvation. And they are words that would require incredible courage if you're delivering words to people that in fact could be taken as this will be poured out on you or this could happen. You have to have courage to be able to stand and open your mouth and say the things that he's going to say. So here's the oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of one of whose eyes see clearly. the oracle of one who hears the words of God, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who falls prostrate and whose eyes are opened. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. Like valleys they spread out, like gardens beside a river, like aloes planted by the Lord, like cedars beside the waters. Water will flow from their buckets. Their seed will have abundant water. Their king will be greater than Agag, and their kingdom will be exalted. God brought them out of Egypt. They have the strength of a wild ox. They devour hostile nations, break their bones in pieces. With their arrows they pierce them. Like a lion they crouch and lay down, like a lioness who dares to rouse them. May those who bless you be blessed, and may those who curse you be cursed. Then Balak's anger burned against Balaam. He struck his hands together and said to him, I summoned you to curse my enemies, but you have blessed them these 3 times. Now leave at once and go home. I said I would reward you handsomely, but the Lord has kept you from being rewarded. I don't know. Okay, Balaam answered Balak. He said, did I not tell the messengers you sent me, even if Balak gave me his palace filled with silver and gold, I could not do anything of my own accord, good or bad, to go beyond the command of the Lord. And I must say only what the Lord says. Now I'm going back to my people, but come, let me warn you of this people, what they will do to your people in days to come. And this is his 4th oracle. And he utters his oracle. The oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of one who sees, whose eyes see clearly, the oracle of one who hears the words of God, who has knowledge from the Most High, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who falls prostrate, and whose eyes are open. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will arise out of Israel. He will crush the foreheads of Moab, the skulls of the sons of Sheth. Edom will be conquered. Seir, his enemy, will be conquered, but Israel will grow strong. A ruler will come out of Jacob and destroy the survivors of the city. Then Balaam saw Amalek and uttered his oracle. Amalek was the first among the nations, but he will come to ruin at last. Then he saw the Kenites and uttered his oracle. Your dwelling place is secure. Your nest is set in a rock. Yet you Kenites will be destroyed when Asher takes you captive. Then he uttered his oracle. Who can live when God does this? Ships will come from the shores of Kittim, and they will subdue Asher and Eber, but they too will come to ruin. Then Balaam got up, returned home, and Balak went his own way. Now, if you only thought that it ended there, you'd say, why do the New Testament writers say error of Balaam, doctrine of Balaam, and the way of Balaam as something wrong? And one writer specifically says, ran greedily after the way of. Well, keep reading, and what you find out is something quite interesting. You see, if you can't curse him, you could do something better. There's always another way. You can always get him to do something that leads them into a state of essentially being cursed by their own acts. So after the prophecies are uttered, now I'm in the King James, chapter 25 says, Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. Now, it seems pretty plain if you read the rest of what this passage entails. If they couldn't be cursed, they could at least become corrupted. God, through his book, had said over and over again to preserve the line of the people, to not have intermarriages and to not mix and mingle. And if you go back and read just the 10 Commandments where he says, I'm a jealous God, thou shalt have no other gods before me, they are now sacrificing to their gods and bowing down to their gods. And it says, Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And most people are convinced, as I am, who will study this passage, that easily you can see when it says that Balaam went home. Did he really? Because in a later chapter, you're going to read that the children of Israel will go out and war is declared. 24,000 men will die in this war of a curse that is placed on the people because of what they've done. But something else happens. Balaam, you'll find this in the 31st chapter, Balaam, the son of Beor, they slew with the sword. These are men sent out, essentially dispatched by Moses. And we have to ask, what on earth was Balaam doing there with these kings of Midian? Moses spake unto the people, arm yourselves unto the war. Go out and make war against the Midianites. Avenge the Lord of Midian. Every tribe, 1,000 throughout all tribes of Israel, you shall send to war. Balaam is amongst those who is slaughtered in this go out and wipe out those people. What's he doing with those 5 kings of Midian? And if you read down in the 16th verse of that 31st chapter of Numbers, it says, behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. And all you've got to do is find the passages interwoven in the Bible that are, you'll find a reference to this in Joshua, you'll find another reference to this in Nehemiah, peppered throughout, essentially telling that Balaam was responsible for leading the charge to these strange women seducing the children of Israel, the men of the children of Israel, and committing fornication, offering sacrifices, and so forth. So it's very interesting to see a careful reading of this. You see, well, along the way, he uttered his words and stayed by what God said. But what was he doing with these kings? When he said he was going home, he obviously didn't go home. And I'm a strong believer that he went back probably to claim his reward, because he ultimately accomplished the purpose. He didn't curse the people, but he definitely got them to fall into the sin that God warned about by bringing in these strange women who ultimately corrupted and perverted the hearts of the men in the camp. So now I'm going to jump forward a little bit. When we come to talking about the apostasy that Jude is writing about, and Peter mentions this as well, and John in Revelation, let's start with John's words when he calls it the doctrine of Balaam. Let's take a look at that for a minute. I know you have to turn back to the back of the book again. It's your exercise for the day. Revelation 2:14. Remember that what we're looking at in Revelation, the 7 churches of Asia Minor who are essentially being warned, there are admonitions to each church, essentially save one. And this is to the church at Pergamos. And nestled in there it says, verse 14, but I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. So from John's writing, and he says, you have people there in amongst you. I have this against you. You have people who are essentially holding the doctrine of Baal. Well, the doctrine of Baal, the doctrine of Balaam, the error and the way are shades of each other. But the doctrine, think of it this way, as I used the word syncretistic. It's no big deal. You ever heard people say, and I've heard this many times, as long as you believe in a higher power. You ever hear that? Well, that might have worked when the world was in ignorance and God did not unfold the truth in his Son, Jesus Christ. That may have worked at a time when there was a pantheon of gods. And that may have worked at a time of ignorance, but in a day and age, and specifically here is an eyewitness to Jesus, and the writing of Revelation 2:14, the message to the 7 churches, is not John's writing per se. John is essentially taking down the words that the Lord is speaking to him. So recognition that there are people there holding the doctrine, just as much as we might talk about the doctrine that they received, the early church, the doctrine of Balaam, but leading the people astray. And they probably did it under the guise of it being a highly religious, spiritual experience. You got to try this. You're going to feel so great when you do this. The feeling you get when you offer this way and you sacrifice this way, it's going to send tingles through your hands. You're going to feel so good, right? This goes on today. I mean, this is why I said you can't make this an archaic book and say, oh, it doesn't apply. This goes on today. When people say, well, why do you need to study this like this? Why do you need to learn these lessons? Why? So that you don't get trapped into somebody saying, you should feel a tingling in your body right now, and you should be lifted off the ground, and suddenly the whole aura around you is whatever. It's for this reason. So the doctrine, there were people that crept into this church at Pergamos, which were propagating. They were teaching other people. Doctrine means something to be taught, something to be learned. They were teaching other people and leading them astray. It's all going to come back to the same thing. Away from the thing that they had received. Remember Jude's words, contending or fighting, I've said agonizing for the faith you once received. So here again, we have this doctrine of Balaam. And it says, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block. And that's why I said, if you are into reading secondary and tertiary material, I highly suggest that you look at some of the Haggadic material. That's more of the Jewish tradition, and a lot of Jewish writings that are pretty prolific on the subject of Balaam, that have some interesting exegetical traditions in them about what Balaam actually did. Pretty fascinating. I'm not going to introduce it here because it's not really needed, but if you're interested, it's quite easy to find. There are a lot of different books, source books that you can look for. I was even tempted to bring some of the Targums that I read to you last week because they even contain some shades of that. Although Balaam is not painted in a negative light for the most part. Even within the passages that I just read to you, he looks like a good guy because he won't go against God's word. So you have to conclude something else happened, which we know obviously he was a definite help in leading the children of Israel to the thing that God said he despised. You'll have no other gods before me. Preserving the line, that they would stay within their own and have children within their own and not intermarry. And God wasn't saying, I don't want mixed marriages, because if that was the case, then Abram would never have had, Moses would never have had the wife that he had. And you can look at some of the people that are recorded for us. There are mixes that occur, but when they were not involved in the potential of being the line to Christ, I don't think it mattered so much as when it came time to start whittling this down to preserve the line that would ultimately produce and bring forth Jesus Christ. So out of Revelation we saw the doctrine. 2 Peter, and you can kind of weave these together and see that if you put these all together, it really gives you the idea. 2 Peter 2. And, of course, the second chapter of 2 Peter is very much like what we're reading in Jude. I almost have to start at verse 14 or verse 13. We'll do it there. It has a better flow. They shall receive the reward of unrighteousness as they that count it pleasure to ride in the daytime. Spots they are and blemishes, sporting themselves, and you can take that if you know what that means in the King James, sporting, with their own deceivings while they feast with you, having eyes full of adultery that cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls, and heart they have exercised with covetous practices. Cursed children, which have forsaken the right way and are gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Bosor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness, but was rebuked for his iniquity. The dumb ass, speaking with man's voice, forbade the madness of the prophet. And he goes on to say, these are wells without water, and so forth. So here, love the wages of unrighteousness. Now let me ask you a question. Why did it take Balaam 3 times to go out? Just, you can read over this and maybe not see the little minutiae. Why did it take 3 times for Balaam to go out and know that these people, if you heard it the first time, these are my people and I'm not going to curse them? Why was there need to go and say, here, let's build another 7 altars and another do the 7 again, right? And let me go back and ask again. If you had heard it the first time, God said no. God said no the first time. We didn't need to come back a second, a third, but I guess if you're really hard of hearing and you really want to push your luck, God said no, no, and no. But there had to be some form of perverseness, and this is what I'm saying to you. If you read between the lines, maybe Balaam in his mind, when he said, I can only do what the Lord says, maybe Balaam thought, maybe I'll go it a second time. And the Lord will say, yeah, curse him. Go out and curse him. And not only would he be accomplishing the thing that Balak had asked, but he'd also be filling his pockets because he was told he'd be paid handsomely. Now, he sounds like a good guy. He says, even if he offered me all the silver and the gold, I would not. But then why'd you have to ask a second and a third time? Furthermore, what on earth were you doing there with the kings of Midian when they came and they killed him? So why ask why, right? But here in 2 Peter it says, the wages of unrighteousness, who love the wages of unrighteousness. And then lastly, to our book that our epistle of Jude that we've been studying. We're in that verse 11. It says, woe unto them, for they have gone the way of Cain. We looked at that last week. Ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward. Now it seems to me that they're nuances, but they're all coming back to the same place. And that is that this individual was motivated by essentially profit for hire. Now, if you don't think that you can apply this to this day and age, you're a lunatic. Because there's plenty of those people that come into the ministry and they don't want to tell people. You know, everybody likes to talk about heaven and salvation and grace and the love of God, but very few messages are preached about hell and the eternal fire that will burn for those who have essentially, as the book of Hebrews talks about, spurned or turned back. Because it's not popular. You won't be liked. You know, our day and age requires that you be politically correct, that you treat every single person. Sorry, why did God not treat every single person the same way? I don't know. But in God's book, he has the right to call and to choose whomever he wants. He certainly did that with Balaam. And he certainly used Balaam as he saw fit. It wasn't necessary for Balaam to come out of the central, Missouri Bible school or whatever for him to be called of God. He was called out of a heathen land just like Abraham was. So when I talk about this, there are several lessons I said. Of course, the main one I'm looking at is the error of Balaam for reward. That's what he went after, profit for hire. People who are always looking to the ministry and saying, you know, this could be a really good, this is the way to increase your giving. This is the way to build your church. And they've got all these great ideas. They're great ideas for the world and for business. Somebody asked me probably a year ago, it was more like 2 years ago, why don't you have women's conferences? And I said, are you kidding me? You mean you'd actually give some men or women, and I'm not being sexist here, you'd actually give people the opportunity to get together and talk about their agenda? Are you kidding me? Do that somewhere else. You come in here to learn about this book and find yourself without gender before God. And I don't mean without gender as in third bathroom, middle door. I mean without God saying you're a man or you're a woman, but you come and you listen to what's being said out of this book and you learn the fact that you and I are ugly sinners needing a God who can wash, cleanse, and save us, and we don't need some conference to tell us about how to get our bodies in better shape or our flab to become muscle, or our minds to become stronger, or how we can be more efficient workers out there in the world. If you need your church to tell you that, you're in the wrong place. You better go out somewhere in the secular and find somewhere to help you get along in the world. But in the church, you come in here, you better have someone open up the book and tell you the ways of people that have gone before have been left as a chronicle for us to learn from, to realize it can happen to anybody. In Jude's day, just what, maybe not even 50 years, I say that generously, removed from the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, this problem is already being confronted of people, essentially, as I've said to you before, defecting from the faith. Why? Because there's always an easier way. Just like that beautiful book, Jonah, that we studied together, there's always a ship going the other way, conveniently to take you to Tarshish. I got news for you. And for all those people that would say, well, but I want my church to be, and you fill in the blanks. I got news for you. It ain't your church. It's not my church either. It's his church. And if it's his church, then it's his way and his word. And we come in, and we all have the bent. Don't just think it's these people. We all have the inclination. The bent is in each and every one of us to want something just a little bit more comfortable, to want something that fits a little bit better into the mold of our mind. What if I had a pastor? Fill in the blanks, and you can say, what if my pastor did this? And what if my pastor was doing more of that or saying more of that? Well, this is the problem, because you'll find the next example is about Korah. And Korah's rebellion was essentially going against the mouthpiece that God had given the children of Israel. And unfortunately, even that type of an error still goes on today, where people think it's easy to stand and tell people about the Word of God. I think the greatest challenge that I have as someone who cares about the Lord's Word, His work, which you are His workmanship, is the delicate balance between giving instruction and making some attempt at saying, make an application, meditate on these things, think about if you are not here on a regular basis, and I've got plenty of people who watch and attend church for this hour, but then they have another church they go to. That's their church, wherever they live, and I just use the word, that's their church. That's where they attend. The main criteria for any person coming in is to make sure that you're learning, you're being taught. And the examples are abundant. That's why I said I love this little book, because right after we've got Cain, who essentially I showed you last week, Cain basically thought his way would be better than God's. And whether it was that he didn't want to offer a bloodless sacrifice, or whether he thought offering to God what he thought was good in his own eyes, doing it his own way, which is essentially the first false religion. The second one we have here is the one that has taken a hold in the church. Well, the church has got to make money. The church has got to be profitable. You have these people come on TV, and you've seen them, and I've seen them too. I used to think, why doesn't God just blot these people out? They come on TV, and they tell you if you'll, send your money, and we'll send you this little vial, and it's full of, they say it's holy water. You send in your money, and we'll send you this vial, and you anoint everything in your house, and you do this. Hey, friend, listen, whatever that water, it probably came out of some spigot out of Riverside that's got rusty water, and you're sending your money to someone who thinks, sucker. If you really want to anoint yourself or your home or whatever it is, get yourself some, you got olive oil in your kitchen, go and take a little bit of it. It's not the oil, it's not the water, it's the name you call on. The name of Jesus Christ has the power to heal. The name of Jesus Christ has the power to anoint and to bless. The name of Jesus Christ. Not the stuff we send you in the mail. Well, I don't buy that at all. Send in your request or whatever, and they send you a rusty nail in the mail. I was just told. Some people have told me about this. I don't know. And listen, people, they bought into that. Just as much as people bought into the Catholic Church's veneration of things that purportedly the finger of John, the hair from such and such a martyr. How do I know that's not some lady that let her armpits grow long in the Middle Ages and they just snipped it away and said, I'll put it in the book. Somebody will come by, we'll venerate this in 100 years. May I present to you the hair of Lady Armpit right here. Surely we laugh, it's funny. But I told you in the days of Martin Luther and just before the Reformation, the circus acts that would come to town, what they would peddle and what they would show people, all for what? So that people would drop money into the bucket because they saw things that they could venerate, and they were taught if they could pray to these items, that something would be happening to their souls in heaven, and they would be liberated, they would be delivered. This is an age-old problem, and as long as we are not contending for the faith, there's no one who's immune. We all become very vulnerable. And God forgive me for making some jokes today, but the reality is that the church is in a serious crisis because too many people say, well, but you don't really have to teach out of this. Just kind of give us an idea. I don't want to give you an idea. Because if I gave you my idea, we'd all be figuring out, well, it's getting hot in here. We might be in a sauna or we could be in hell. I'd much rather tell you about what's in the book. You take the lessons and figure out that God preserved them for us for a reason, as a warning, as an admonition. And as I said, regarding Korah didn't have any fear to speak against Moses and say, hey, Moses, you're not like Miriam. You're not the only one who has this ability to speak and to lead people, and we don't agree with you at all. I wish to God that there have been times over the last many years that I've been pastor here that God would do what he did to Korah and Korah's band, which is open up the earth. You keep talking, keep going, and while you're busy talking and you're opening your mouth, God opens up the earth and goes like a giant, okay, that's done. I have wonderful imaginations about some of the people over the years who have just opened their mouth and be like, God, could you just do what you did to Korah? That'd be really great. It'd be like a great display of power. More importantly, I wouldn't have to listen to that individual anymore. And then I turn around and I'm very sorrowful and ask God to forgive me because I know that God sends thorns too, as well as Satan does, into every person's life. And my lot is to be a lot more forgiving and understanding because I know better that some people will just open their mouth because they have one, right? But in the big picture, God says, I gave leadership for a reason. I gave pastors and teachers for a reason. And I know with studying the book of Jude, it's become very clear to me that this is a message for today like no other out of this book. Although Paul, in the book of Romans, lays out the doctrinal foundation for salvation, and then the latter chapters become more behavioral, applicable, day-to-day living, Jude is definitely, in 25 verses, the explanation of what can happen to any church if we are not vigilant to keep fighting the good fight of faith and contending for the faith. So I hope you will take the message and don't just think, oh, wow, that was kind of cool, but realize the danger lurks everywhere around us. Be vigilant and keep faithing. That's my message. You've been watching me, Pastor Melissa Scott, live from Glendale, California at Faith Center. If you would like to attend the service with us Sunday morning at 11 a.m., simply call 1-800-338-3030 to receive your pass. If you'd like more teaching and you'd like to go straight to our website, the address is www.pastormelissascott.com.